will segue into our next brief speaker, Roberta Winters, who is going to talk to us a little bit about the upcoming referendum that will be on the ballot for the November election. Let me just tell you a little bit about Roberta. She's a retired school teacher who served 2 terms on the State Board of League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania as the Director for Natural Resources and as Vice President for Issues and Action, respectfully. She coordinates the Marcellus Shale natural gas extraction study guides and chaired the addendum studies on pipeline and pooling. She currently serves as president of the Radnor League of Women Voters. One of her latest ventures, or adventures, is working in coalition with parents, school administrators, board members, elected officials, and league leaders across 3 counties to study adolescent sleep needs and advocate for change to promote student well-being. But she's talking to us about the referendum that's going to be on the ballot in the November election, and we hope you're very excited about how important local elections are and appreciate the information that has been shared by the Jane and Gary Show. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm the after-dinner speech. Yes. Please look at that pink sheet of paper, on the hot pink sheet of paper on the table. That is the item that you will see on your referendum. You will be receiving the opportunity to vote yes or no on that ballot item. What's the first question that I'm just going to go through this quickly. It says, shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended? You know how the Pennsylvania Constitution is amended? You do, right?
Convention.
All right, I'll tell you because you don't have a lot of time. It has to be approved by 2 successive legislators, and then a public referendum. So there has to go through. Laura, is that correct?
Right.
Correct. Thank you, Laura. Now, so they're trying to ask us to amend the Constitution to permit the General Assembly to enact legislation authorizing local taxing authorities. Who are local taxing authorities? The borough, the school district, and the county. So that would go to all of those people to exclude from taxation up to 100% of the assessed value of each homestead property. You know what the assessed value is, right?
Yes.
But that could change. And you know what a homestead is?
Yes.
Could be a farmstead too. But basically the homestead is your primary residence. So it's not your apartment house. It could be a condo. It's not a business. It's where you live. And within a local taxing jurisdiction, rather than limit the exclusion, which you already have, maybe you didn't know it, but you already have the right to limit the exclusion to 1/2 of the median assessed values of all homestead properties within your jurisdiction, which is the existing law. So currently, you have a homestead exemption, and that only applies if they're reducing property taxes because they have another source of income. So in order to do that, your local municipality or taxing authority would need to have, for example, institute an income tax. And that income tax could either be something like a personal income tax, which a lot of retired people resent because that includes your stocks and bonds and all those things, or it could be an earned income tax.
Local municipalities, there is no personal income tax. It can only be earned income tax.
It can only be earned income tax now. Thank you, Jane. So that's what you get, when you work. So the bottom line is, that's what the exclusion amendment would deal with. Now, so if it's approved, is anything going to happen to your taxes? No, nothing's going to happen. This is not going to change anything until the legislature enacts what they call enabling legislation, which would lay out how this was all going to be done. So, I'm going to have a few of our legislators speak to you today. All right, Michelle's over here. Michelle, tell us, what do you think about this referendum?
I know people are struggling with their property tax bills, and this is an important conversation to have, but all of the facts must be part of the conversation. People need to hear the whole story. This is a major policy shift. The only piece people are talking about seems to be that it might remove property taxes. But this homestead exemption legislation is just the first piece to raising the personal income tax, increasing sales tax, or taxing things that are not currently taxed. It is a bit disingenuous to omit that part of the conversation. We need to call it what it is. People are tired of being misled. They need all of the information.
So you don't think bottom line is?
Bottom line is,
People don't think they're informed.
they're not informed.
So she's yelling, what's the word? Shift. She's saying this is a tax shift. This is not a big deal, but it could be, because we don't know what's going to happen, what the legislature is going to do. I have a couple of other people here today who are going to speak on the issue, and these are other legislators here. Would you please, I think your name here is Mario Scavello. You may have heard of him. Mario, what do you have to tell us?
Okay. We can all agree that any tax that would take a person's home after working their entire life to pay for it is wrong and immoral. No individual should have to choose between paying for prescription medications, taking care of their health, and paying for property taxes. People should be able to own their property, and enactment of this constitutional amendment will protect and safeguard that constitutional right.
Thank you. And I think supporting him is David. David, where are you today? Oh, David Malone. David Maloney. Thank you, David, for being here today. I think you want to add to what she said.
Thank you. While this is the current mechanism to provide residential property tax relief, it is inadequate as it caps the amount of relief that can be provided. There is a need to fund the core functions of government, roads, schools, public safety. But I do not believe that a tax that would take a person's home after working their whole life to pay for it is a core function of government. In fact, it is immoral.
My, they certainly have strong opinions. I think you're talking not about a shift. You think this referendum is a relief for those people who might lose their homes. So we have a disagreement, and we as voters are going to decide whether we believe this is worth having a vote on in terms of giving people relief, or whether it's really not a good idea because it's probably just going to shift what we already pay because we don't know the whole facts. So, what I have provided for you, and you can leave with this little document, gives you what opponents are going to say and what proponents say. And until the implementing legislation is really enacted, we do not know what it will do. So, the proponents say it's a relief, right? Mario and David, you're going to get one of these when you leave, so don't be hasty. I don't want to give you away all my talking points. So, you heard that it meets the needs of people on fixed incomes, right? That's good. And it's going to work towards property tax independence. However, the tax bill, which they have referred to, which was Senate Bill and House Bill 76. Thank you. Which is House Bill 76 and Senate Bill 76.
You gotta put it in front of your mouth.
Under which the property tax continues to pay for existing debt. So even if the property tax is exempt with this exclusion, you would still have to have property taxes pay for existing debt. And you know, a lot of school districts have a lot of debt for building new buildings and things. It would provide greater flexibility for funding schools, and some people believe it's the first step of reforming school funding. As you know, school funding is not the best in the world, right? In Pennsylvania, it does need to be reformed. The question is this the way to do it? And Laura has left a lot of good pieces of information on your table about that issue. The opponents, and we heard David speak, Michelle, you spoke so eloquently. You said that, you know, they could tax our clothes now.
Yes.
They could increase the income tax. So maybe we'd all end up paying a little more or a little less. It all depends on whether you're, you know, what your income is, whether you're working, whether you're not working, how much your kids need. And some people in my school district are very upset because they're afraid they're going to lose local control of the schools because they won't be putting their money where their mouth is. And in fact, the money might come from Harrisburg, and Harrisburg does not always have the best record of finishing budgets on time. And they might hold local school districts and local municipalities hostage until they've had a budget passed and adequate funding sources. And it really doesn't address the inequities. I live in Radnor. You know what they pay for school taxes and what those schools are like? Chester's in Delaware County. They have problems. Their property tax base is not what it is in Radnor. So that basic inequity is not going to be solved by this kind of referendum because the disparities will still be existing. And if you listen to Jane and Gary, you could tell they were ticked off because the state keeps making them do things that they never dreamed they would have to do. Now, the school districts have the same kind of mandates they're operating. Special ed mandates for educating people about concussions, providing opioid treatments in the schools. Who's paying for that? Through our local property taxes. We pay for busing the kids to private and parochial schools. You wouldn't choose to do that as a school district, but the state mandates it. So many of the costs that we are paying are again from state mandates. Just like your local municipal government, the school districts also have that same kind of burden. So, we know school funding is not great, and they'll tell you all the problems with that. We know that voter approval will not eliminate property taxes or have any immediate impact if you vote on this referendum. No immediate impact. But it does provide potential impact. Amending the PA Constitution cannot change a tax bill or compel a school district to lower rates. Its passage only opens the door for legislation to expand that exclusion if new revenue sources are found. We don't know what those revenue sources are. We don't know how susceptible those sources would be to legislative action or inaction. You've all seen how they take money out of things like the certain accounts that were supposed to be earmarked specifically for things like growing greener and things like that, and all of a sudden that money disappears. And to what extent local taxing authorities will even implement these provisions. Because while we currently can exclude up to 50%, not many places have done that. Not even close to it. I think only, I can count on my fingers the number of people who've tried, the number of counties and municipalities and school districts who've done that. I will give you some background on the homestead exclusion. It's here. I will also give you the League of Women Voters position, which is not necessarily for or against it, but what our position is regarding to local taxes, and specifically for school districts, and also other resources to go to. This is an issue which I think people need to read and understand, and further know that there is no immediate impact, but the potential exists for some very challenging times depending on what the implementing legislation looks like. And I would say this, probably not the league line, but my mother's line: when in doubt, don't.
Thank you.
Roberta, say something about ballot.
Mr. Roberta, in the wee hours of the late last night, I was inspired to go to the website of the Pennsylvania
Budget
and Policy Center. And some years ago, I wrote a piece for the Pennsylvania Voter based on a study that they did, which showed that Pennsylvania has one of the most regressive tax systems in the country. So one of the papers that I put there shows how regressive our system is. The people in the lowest income category pay much more of their income in taxes than people in the top 1%. And there's a graph on that, there that shows that. I think this is something that we need to take into consideration when we look at eliminating the property tax. The other thing is that the Policy Center has shown that eliminating that property tax would actually make our tax system even more regressive. You know, I suspect that the referendum is going to pass because it's a very popular notion. So forget about the idea that you know, the voters are going to turn this down. But the legislature has to implement it. And I think that it is up to us, the League of Women Voters, to really start a serious education project to point out what the problems, the real problems are in Pennsylvania. What the legislature is doing now, you know, trying to shift the burden to expand gambling, for example, that is not going to solve the problem. What we need to do is to reform our tax system. So.
Laura, I would concur completely, and if you look under the background information I provided, it'll tell you that the decline in state aid that we've had since in recent years has translated into about $14 billion in school funding being generated at the local level. That's a lot of money. And this is a crippling impact on the school districts, and it again has created that widening gap between the poor school districts and the affluent ones. So we do have a new funding formula which has given some people hope, but again that only applies to new money, not all the old money over the decades that people are still going to be paying for a long, long time.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Thank you all for